so his young family could start fresh. I even signed over my house, thinking it would keep them safe. The very next day, they sold it and left the country, leaving only a note that cut deeper than any bill. Follow this story to the end and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far it travels. The call came on a quiet Tuesday morning while I was watering my roses. Mom, can I come over? It's urgent. At 68, I'd heard every shade of my son Neil's voice, but never this one. He arrived 20 minutes later, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. Behind him came Avalon, my daughter-in-law, her beauty as precise as ever, but with a glint I couldn't name. They sat at my kitchen table, Neil in the same chair he'd used when he was a boy in trouble. Between shaky breaths, he confessed, bad investments, foreclosure, lawyers threatening to take everything. How much? I asked. Avalon answered before he could. 170,000. The number hit like a hammer. It was almost my entire life savings, 40 years of careful planning, and the modest pension from my late husband Harold. But the thought of my grandchildren losing their home left no room for hesitation. Neil finally met my eyes, red-rimmed and pleading. Mom, I don't know where else to turn. The kids keep asking why we're looking at apartments. I can't tell them we might end up with nowhere to go. Avalon placed a perfectly manicured hand on his shoulder. Family helps family, she said, her tone sweet but edged. I looked at my grown son, 43 and unraveling, and thought of Emma and Jake, just 12 and 9. They didn't deserve this. All right, I said quietly. I'll cover the debt. You can stay here until you're back on your feet. Relief flooded Neil's face as he hugged me tight. Over his shoulder, I caught a fleeting look on Avalon's face, not gratitude, but a flash of cold satisfaction. I told myself it was just stress. We moved quickly. I signed the papers, emptied my savings, and handed over the deed to the house Harold and I had built a life in. I believed I was rescuing my family. I never imagined that by the next morning, both they and the house would be gone. The next few days were a blur of signatures and phone calls. I emptied the savings account I'd built over 40 years, watching decades of discipline disappear with a few strokes of a pen. Mrs. Henderson, the bank manager who'd known me for 20 years, studied me with quiet concern. Are you sure about this, Colleen? It's your entire nest egg. It's for my family, I said, keeping my voice steady even as my hands trembled. Transferring the house was trickier. My lawyer, Jim Patterson, had handled my late husband Harold's will, and his brow furrowed as he looked over the paperwork. Colleen, we could set this up so you keep some protection, shared ownership at least. Are you certain? My son needs stability. His children need a home, I replied. This is the right thing. Neil shifted uneasily, eyes fixed on the floor. Avalon, on the other hand, was all warmth and polish. We completely understand your concern, Mr. Patterson, she said smoothly. This will be a true family home where we can care for each other. When Jim stepped out to make copies, I caught Avalon whispering to Neil, the sooner we finish, the better, before she changes her mind. A chill slid down my spine. She turned back to me with a bright smile. I was just telling Neil how grateful we are, Colleen. The children are thrilled to live with Grandma. I forced a smile of my own, pushing down the unease. When everything was finalized, Neil hugged me tight. Mom, you've saved us. I promise we'll make this work. We'll take care of you too. Avalon nodded, her enthusiasm flawless. Absolutely. We're one family now, under one roof. It's going to be perfect. I watched them drive off to collect their belongings, standing in the doorway of what was no longer legally mine. Instead of pride, I felt a strange hollowness. That night, I sat in Harold's old chair, surrounded by memories of birthdays and Christmas mornings, telling myself this was what families did. Love in action. 3 weeks later, I woke to an unnatural silence. No Emma getting ready for school, no Jake's cartoons, no gurgle of Avalon's coffee maker. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock Harold had given me on our 25th anniversary. Downstairs, the house felt stripped. Family photos gone from the mantel, Avalon's decorative vases missing. Even the children's backpacks had vanished. My heart pounded as I searched for a note, an explanation. On the kitchen counter lay a single folded sheet with my name in Avalon's sharp handwriting. Colleen, thanks for everything. We sold the house yesterday and are starting fresh somewhere new. Don't try to find us. A small postscript twisted the knife. P.S. Well, you're an old fool. I read it 3 times, barely able to breathe. They had sold my house. the one I'd signed over to save them, without a word of goodbye. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. House sale complete. New owners take possession Monday. Please vacate by Sunday. It was Friday. The reality hit like a storm. I had no savings. No home. Less than 3 days to leave. I called Neil. The number was disconnected. Avalon's phone went straight to a full voicemail box. Their social media accounts? Gone. They hadn't simply left. They'd erased themselves. I sank into the same kitchen chair where Neil had once wept, begging for help. The irony was brutal. I was now homeless in what had been my own home, betrayed by the very people I'd sacrificed everything to protect. Every promise, every tender word, every "we'll take care of you" had been a lie. The money in the house hurt, yes, but the worst wound was knowing my own son had planned the deception. The boy I'd rocked through fevers, cheered on at baseball games, trusted with my heart, had looked me straight in the eye and lied without a flicker of doubt. Around noon, a soft knock broke the silence. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Henley, my next-door neighbor, holding a casserole and wearing the look she usually saved for funerals. "Colleen, I heard voices early this morning, saw a moving truck. Is everything okay?" A moving truck. They'd hired professionals while I slept, quietly packing their lives and vanishing like smoke. I opened the door, still clutching Avalon's note. One glance at my face and Mrs. Henley stepped inside. "Oh, honey, what happened?" The story spilled out in fragments. Her expression shifted from concern to shock to open outrage. "That's fraud," she said flatly. "You need to call the police." But what crime could I report? I had signed every paper willingly. They made no legal promise that I could stay. The cruelty was devastating, but likely not illegal. "What will you do now?" she asked gently. I didn't know. At 68, with no savings and no home, the future felt like a cliff. Maybe a motel for a few weeks, but then. Senior apartments had long wait lists. My small monthly check barely covered groceries, let alone rent. The words tasted bitter as I whispered, "I might have to call the Salvation Army. See if they have emergency housing?" Tears welled in Mrs. Henley's eyes. "Colleen, you can stay with us while you figure this out." "It's not much, but..." "No," I cut her off, voice tight. "I won't impose." Her simple kindness, after the cold precision of my own family, nearly broke me. I excused myself and sobbed behind the bathroom door until my chest ached. That afternoon, I began packing 40 years of life into a few old suitcases. I lingered over every keepsake. Harold's reading glasses on the nightstand, the quilt my mother had sewn for our wedding, photographs of Neil at every age. How had that sweet boy become someone capable of this? While folding Harold's favorite sweater, a phone alert blinked. A real estate listing, my house. Mrs. Henley must have forwarded it, trying to help. Charming colonial with original hardwood floors and vintage fixtures. The asking price, $340,000. I stared until the numbers blurred. They'd sold it for nearly twice the amount I'd given them. After paying their so-called debts, they'd walk away with a fortune. My fortune. Then one line in the property disclosure froze me. Ongoing structural assessments and potential foundation concerns. My pulse raced as I read further. Settling issues, recommended geological surveys, prior homeowner awareness. Of course I knew. Harold and I had discovered the problem 15 years earlier when we tried to finish the basement. An engineer had warned that the soil beneath the house could shift and crack the foundation. Repairs would cost more than the property itself. Neil had been there when we heard the verdict. He'd seen the paperwork. He knew. They hadn't just taken my money. They'd used the house, its hidden flaws, as a time bomb to fund their escape. My phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed. I answered, "Mrs. Morrison?" "This is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh & Associates Real Estate. We represent the buyers of 47 Maple Street. There's been a significant development regarding the foundation inspection." My grip tightened. "What kind of development?" "Well, ma'am, the inspectors found serious structural issues that weren't properly disclosed. The new owners are facing enormous repair costs and are considering legal action against the sellers." My mouth went dry. "Legal action?" I repeated. "Yes, ma'am," the real estate agent said. "Property fraud is serious, especially when known defects are hidden. Do you know how to reach Mr. Neil Morrison and his wife? We have urgent papers to serve." I glanced at Avalon's cruel note, "Old fool, you stink," and for the first time since reading it, I smiled. "I'm sorry," I said evenly. "I have no idea where they are." 3 weeks later, I sat on the edge of a narrow bed in the Sunset Manor efficiency apartment. 400 square feet of beige walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. My entire life reduced to this sterile box. A thick stack of legal papers rested on my lap. Calls from lawyers and real estate agents came daily, all searching for Neil and Avalon. The buyers of my former home, the Hendersons, a young couple with twin toddlers, were demanding answers. They discovered that the foundation was failing and the structure was unsafe. Their lawyer accused the sellers of deception. The insurance company had launched its own investigation, and I, with no address for my son and no proof of anything, was stuck in the middle. That morning, I'd sat in the Social Security office, listening as a weary caseworker named Sandra explained the math of survival. "Your monthly benefit is $1,847, she said gently. "It barely covers basics. Housing assistance is possible. The wait is 18 months, maybe 2 years. 2 years. At 68, already worn down by stress, it felt like forever. The loneliness was worse than the money. Neil had been my link to the outside world. His children, Emma and Jake, had been my brightest joy. Did they even know what their parents had done? Did they think I had simply disappeared? Mrs. Henley still called now and then, her kindness a small light. She invited me to stay with her family again, but pride, and a need to keep what dignity I had, made me decline. Depression crept in like rising water. Some mornings, I couldn't find a reason to get out of bed. The kitchenette mocked me with its single burner and mini fridge. I'd gone from hosting Sunday dinners to heating canned soup for one. At night, I spoke to Harold's photo on the nightstand. "I really messed up this time," I whispered to his smiling face. "You always said I trusted too easily." You were right. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I replayed every warning sign I'd ignored. Avalon's remarks about the house being too big, Neil's sudden curiosity about my finances after years of distance, their rush to finalize paperwork, and their insistence that I not involve another lawyer. How had I been so blind? The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. I nearly let it go. Most calls were from debt collectors chasing Neil, but something made me answer. "Mrs. Morrison?" "This is Detective Martinez with the County Fraud Unit. We need to discuss the transfer and sale of 47 Maple Street. We've opened an investigation after complaints from the current owners." My blood chilled. "I haven't done anything wrong," I said quickly, voice trembling. "I don't believe you have," he replied. "But there are irregularities in the paperwork that suggest this wasn't a standard family transaction." Irregularities. The word echoed long after the call ended. What else had Neil and Avalon done? What lies had they told? What laws had they broken, using me as their unwitting accomplice? That night's sleep never came. I lay in the dark, the sound of a neighbor's television seeping through thin walls, replaying every conversation with my son. The more I examined his story about foreclosure, the more it unraveled. I'd never seen a single official notice, and for the first time, I realized the betrayal might only be the beginning. Neil had claimed lawyers were involved, but he'd never shared a single name or phone number. He'd painted such a vivid picture of financial ruin that I'd handed over everything without demanding proof. What if the debts were fiction? What if the crisis was nothing more than a script to steal my home and my savings? The thought made me physically ill. I brewed a cup of tea with trembling hands and sat at the tiny table by the window. The parking lot outside was nearly empty, a few lonely cars belonging to residents who, like me, had nowhere else to go. My reflection in the dark glass startled me, a pale, tired woman who looked a decade older than her 68 years. Only a month earlier, I'd had a house, a cushion of savings, a family. That woman had been naive, but she'd believed she was loved. Scrolling through my contacts, I saw how few names remained. Harold and I had kept to ourselves. Neil had been our social life, our link to the future. Without him, I was truly alone. The next morning, Detective Martinez called again. "We've located Neil and Avalon," he said. "They're in Costa Rica. We're working with international authorities to see what can be done." Costa Rica? The words barely left my lips. Yes, ma'am. They purchased property there shortly after selling your house. While I worried about rent and groceries, they'd been living in tropical comfort on the money I'd trusted them with. Mrs. Morrison, Martinez continued, I need to ask about the house's condition when you transferred ownership. The buyers alleged serious structural issues were concealed. I closed my eyes, the truth heavy on my tongue. I knew about the foundation problems, I admitted. My husband and I discovered them years ago. Neil knew too. He was there when the engineer explained it. Silence hummed on the line. Did you disclose those issues to your son at the time of transfer? No, I whispered. I believed they were going to live there. I never imagined they'd sell it. Another long pause. Ma'am, I recommend hiring a lawyer. From what I see, you're a victim here. The situation is complex. You need representation. Victim. The word should have comforted me, but instead it underscored how completely I'd been stripped of everything. That afternoon, we sat by the window, watching strangers go about their lives, people who still trusted the ones they loved. I envied their certainty. Then, beneath the sorrow, a new feeling surfaced, anger. Neil and Avalon were sipping cocktails in paradise, convinced they'd beaten me. They thought I was finished. They had no idea what they'd set in motion. The law office of Peterson and Associates occupied the third floor of a modest downtown building. Nothing glossy, just wood paneling and the faint scent of paper and coffee. Sarah Peterson, a sharp-eyed attorney with silver threads in her hair, greeted me with a steady handshake. Mrs. Morrison, she said, guiding me to a chair. Detective Martinez briefed me. This is one of the more unusual cases I've seen. Unusual, that word again. I want to be up front, she continued, opening a thick file. I'm taking this case pro bono because I believe you've been wronged. But the legal terrain is complicated. For an hour, she explained the maze Neil and Avalon had created. Property fraud, elder exploitation statutes, concealment of known defects, even possible mail fraud if they'd use false documents. The good news, Sarah said, is that the buyers of your house aren't pursuing you. Their insurance company agrees you were an unwitting participant. Some tension eased from my shoulders. The bad news, she added, is that recovering your losses will be difficult. Even if we prove fraud, most of the money appears to be hidden overseas. I nodded, a mix of relief and resolve settling over me. For the first time since the nightmare began, I wasn't just a victim. I was ready to fight. Sarah slid a new document across the desk, its top stamped with an official seal. There's been a development, she said, her eyes bright with purpose. The Costa Rican authorities have frozen several bank accounts linked to your son and his wife. My heart jolted. Why? They made a critical mistake. When they bought property in Costa Rica, they had to declare the source of their funds. They claimed the money came from the sale of a family home that had been gifted to them. But during the bank's routine checks, the foundation problems and the ongoing legal issues came to light. She leaned forward, voice low and steady. Costa Rica is strict about foreign money tied to questionable real estate deals. They take it seriously. They don't want their country used for international property scams. Your son and daughter-in-law are now under investigation for money laundering. Their property has been seized. They're not allowed to leave the country. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. What does that mean for me? It means leverage, Sarah replied. They'll be desperate to settle before Costa Rican prosecutors file formal charges. She unlocked her phone and turned the screen toward me. A headline from a Costa Rican English-language newspaper blazed across it. American couple detained in property fraud investigation. Below the headline was a photo of Neil and Avalon, handcuffed, being escorted from what looked like a police station. My breath caught. Seeing my son like that should have hurt, but all I felt was a cold, quiet satisfaction. They looked frightened and unkempt, nothing like the confident pair who'd vanished with my savings. There's more, Sarah said, drawing me back. She handed me an engineering report from the buyer's insurance company. I scanned the technical jargon, confused. Plain English, please? The house is uninhabitable, she explained. The foundation has shifted so badly that repairs would exceed $400,000. More than the property is worth. I thought of Harold's worried face years ago when we'd first heard the warnings. We'd known it was bad, but not this bad. And the timeline matters, Sarah continued. The deterioration accelerated over the last 5 years. Your son and daughter-in-law were living in a house that was literally collapsing, and they knew it. They could have asked you to help with repairs, but instead they waited. They wanted the house to become your burden so they could disappear with your money. The calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. This wasn't panic. It was a long, deliberate plan. Sarah's expression softened, but her words hit hard. We dug into their finances, the debts, the supposed foreclosure. None of it exists. They've been financially stable for years. Good jobs, healthy savings, no record of hardship. The room tilted around me. Every tear Neil had shed, every desperate plea, it had all been theater. Why? My voice was barely a whisper. From what we can tell, she said gently, they'd been planning an international move for a long time. They needed cash to start a new life. Your house and savings were the easiest source. Easy, I repeated, bitterness in my throat. I know this is painful, Sarah said quietly, but here's the path forward. The Costa Rican authorities are willing to work with us if they agree to restitution. They'd rather settle quickly than pursue a lengthy case. If your son and daughter-in-law refuse, they'll face prosecution there, possible prison time and the loss of everything they tried to take. She placed another document in front of me. Either way, you stand to recover at least part of what you lost. I looked down at the papers, official seals, signatures, the promise of consequences, and felt, for the first time since this nightmare began, that justice might finally be on my side. Sarah slid a final packet across the desk. The heading read, Settlement Proposal. They've indicated through their Costa Rican attorney that they're willing to negotiate, she said. I scanned the numbers. It wasn't everything I'd lost, but it was enough to give me back stability. Enough for a small home, enough to rebuild a life. There's one more condition, Sarah added, her tone sharpening. They want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You'd be legally barred from discussing any of this. I stared at the clause. They're trying to buy my silence. Essentially, yes. The decision is yours. I thought of Avalon's cruel note, of the sterile apartment where I'd wondered if I'd die alone, of the fear and humiliation they'd orchestrated. Money might steady my finances, but it couldn't erase the damage. I need to think, I said. Sarah nodded. Don't wait too long. The Costa Rican authorities won't hold them forever. If they're released, recovering anything will be far harder. That night, I sat at my tiny table, settlement papers spread before me. The figures were generous, enough to buy a modest house and live comfortably for the rest of my life. But the non-disclosure clause gnawed at me. Accepting it felt like letting them rewrite history. Mrs. Henley called for her weekly check-in. That's wonderful news, she said when I told her about the offer. I suppose, I answered, my voice flat. You sound unconvinced. It feels like they're getting away with it. A payout and then back to their lives while I try to rebuild mine. Sometimes, she said softly. The best revenge is simply moving on and being happy anyway. Wise words. Yet as I looked at Harold's photo on the nightstand, I knew taking the hush money would let them win. They thought I was weak. They had no idea what they'd awakened. The next morning, I skipped my usual volunteer shift and spent the entire day researching Costa Rican property law. What I found electrified me. The country's regulations on foreign real estate purchases were ironclad. Fraudulent funds, undeclared defects, those could mean permanent deportation, lifetime bans, even prison. But one discovery chilled me more than anything. I called Sarah as soon as her office opened. About the foundation problems, I began. You said the serious settling started around 2019? That's right, she confirmed. The engineering report shows significant movement beginning then. Neil and Avalon moved in during 2020, I said slowly. They lived there 3 years, fully aware the foundation was failing. Sarah was silent for a beat. Colleen, what are you getting at? They didn't just know about the damage, I said, my voice gaining strength. They accelerated it. On purpose, I recounted the details that had surfaced in my sleepless night, Neil insisting on doing the basement work himself. My questions brushed off when cracks appeared in the walls. The mysterious water issues he claimed were too technical for me to understand. He wasn't repairing anything, I said. He was making it worse, deliberately. Sarah drew a long breath. If that's true, it isn't just fraud. It's a criminal conspiracy that spans years. Can we prove it? We might. she said carefully. The engineering report includes photos that suggest deliberate interference, not natural settling. If we can obtain the contractor records from the work Neil claimed to have done, my hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from a surge of resolve. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just a victim waiting for restitution. I was the one bringing the fight. And my son and his wife were about to learn that they had underestimated me from the very start. From that moment on, my anger burned white hot. There's something else, I told Sarah. The water damage I mentioned. Neil said the insurance company covered most of it, but I had to pay a $5,000 deductible. I wrote a check directly to the restoration company. Do you have a record of the payment? She asked. I kept the check stub. The company was called Avalon Restoration Services. The silence on the line stretched until it hummed. Colleen, Sarah said finally, you'd better sit down. Avalon Restoration Services was incorporated in Delaware 3 years ago. The sole owner is your daughter-in-law. The room tilted. They hadn't just stolen from me once. They'd been bleeding me dry for years, fabricating emergencies and funneling the money through a company with Avalon's name on it. How much? My voice was barely a whisper. We'll need a full audit, Sarah said. But based on what you've told me, we're looking at tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent charges, on top of the property theft. I thought of every urgent repair, every wad of cash I'd handed over without question, all the grateful smiles Avalon had given me while she quietly emptied my life. They played a long game, I murmured. But now we have a paper trail. That afternoon, Sarah and I met Detective Martinez again, presenting a stack of evidence that mapped out years of calculated elder fraud. His expression hardened as he absorbed the details. This changes everything, he said. We're not looking at a desperate couple anymore. This is organized criminal activity. What does that mean for the Costa Rican case? Sarah asked. It means we'll request extradition for prosecution here. The charges we can file are far more serious than what they face there. He turned to me. Mrs. Morrison, if we pursue this, your son could face 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Your daughter-in-law could face the same. The weight of it hit like a blow. And Neil, my little boy, could spend the rest of his 30s and 40s behind bars. Emma and Jake would grow up with their father in prison. What about my grandchildren? I asked quietly. Child Services in Costa Rica is already involved, Martinez said. They're with a family friend for now, but if their parents are extradited... He didn't need to finish. That night I sat beneath the dim light of my apartment, Harold's photo in my hands. What would you do? I asked the smiling face. They destroyed my life, but they're still my family. The silence was unbearable. At 11 p.m., my phone rang, an international number I almost ignored. Mom. Neil's voice was thin, desperate, a faint echo of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. Please, I know what you must think of me, but you have to listen. I'm listening, I said flatly. The lawyers here say you're refusing the settlement. They say you're pushing for extradition. Mom, please. Emma and Jake are terrified. They don't understand. I pictured my grandchildren's faces. Maybe you should have thought about that before you robbed me, I said. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he pleaded. We were going to pay you back once we got established. We were going to take care of you. With what money, Neil? The money you stole? We made mistakes. But if you let them extradite us, the kids will have nobody. They'll end up in foster care. The manipulation was so blatant, it made me sick. Even now, with prison looming, he was using my love for the children as leverage. You should have thought about that before you spent 3 years dismantling my life, I said. 3 years? Mom, what are you talking about? Avalon Restoration Services, I said coldly. Ring a bell? The fake water damage, the unnecessary repairs, the deliberate sabotage of the foundation. I know everything. Silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was harder, more like hers. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I said, calm and steady, I can, and I will. You'd really destroy your own family over money? The question hung between us, heavy with every sacrifice I'd ever made for him. You destroyed this family the day you decided I was worth more to you as a bank account than as a mother, I said quietly. The day you chose greed over love. Mom, I'm not your mother anymore, Neil. Mothers protect their children. They don't strip them of everything and leave them homeless. I hung up on Neil before he could answer. The next morning, I called Sarah Peterson. I'm not signing the settlement, I said. File every charge you can. Are you certain? Once we start, there's no going back. I thought of Avalon's cruel note, the fake emergencies, the years of quiet manipulation. I'm sure. My grandchildren deserve better than the parents they have. When I ended the call, a strange calm settled over me. Not happiness exactly, but peace. For the first time in months, I wasn't hiding from the truth or shielding people who had never protected me. Neil and Avalon had made their choices. Now they would face the consequences. And for the first time, those consequences felt like freedom. 18 months later, I stood in the sunlit kitchen of my new house, my house. A modest 2-bedroom cottage with a small garden just big enough for roses. I poured coffee while the morning news murmured in the background. A headline caught my ear. American citizens extradited to face fraud charges. Neil and Avalon had been returned from Costa Rica 6 months earlier. Their trial had been swift. The evidence was undeniable. Neil received 7 years in federal prison, Avalon 5. Their Costa Rican property and every asset tied to the fraud were seized and sold, funding restitution. Justice, at least on paper, was complete. I felt no triumph, only a deep, quiet exhaustion. The hardest moment hadn't been testifying or even seeing Neil in an orange jumpsuit. It came 2 months after their arrest when my phone rang and a tentative young voice said, "Grandma Colleen, this is Emma." My heart nearly stopped. Emma, now 14, was calling from the foster home in San Jose, where she and Jake had been placed. "We're okay," she said softly. "The family is nice. They're helping us with English and Spanish." Then the question I dreaded. "Grandma, did Mom and Dad really steal from you?" I closed my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, we did." Child Services had already told her about the stolen house and money, but hearing it from me made it real. "Are you mad at us?" she whispered. "Oh, honey, no. Never." "Then why didn't you bring us home?" "The lawyer said you could have asked for custody." The ache in my chest was almost unbearable. "Emma, I wanted to. But I was 69, living in a tiny apartment with nothing. I couldn't give you the life you deserved." "We wouldn't have minded being poor with you," she said simply. That quiet faith nearly broke me. "Sometimes love means wanting better for someone than what you can give," I told her. We spoke for an hour, and I learned she and Jake were thriving. Emma mastering Spanish, Jake playing soccer, both doing well in school. They were building a new life, safe and cared for, even if I wasn't there. Since then, I've sent money, birthday gifts, care packages filled with books and American treats, but I haven't seen them in person, and I may never. The coffee finished brewing. I added cream from the little pitcher that once belonged to my mother, savoring the simple luxury. My phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Henley, now my closest friend. "Coffee this morning. I have news about the Peterson girl." I smiled and replied, "Come over, I'll make breakfast." 20 minutes later, she arrived with a box of pastries and her usual morning cheer. "You look better," she said, studying my face. "More rested." "It's true," I admitted. "I finally sleep through the night. The anxiety is gone." "That's what happens when you stop carrying other people's guilt," she said, cutting straight to the heart of it, as always. She asked gently, "Any word from the kids?" "Emma emails sometimes," I said, a small warmth spreading through me. I no longer carried the weight of my son's crimes. I'd lost a family and built a life, and in the quiet of that kitchen, with roses blooming outside and a friend across the table, I realized I had finally reclaimed something more important than money or property. I'd reclaimed myself. "They're doing well," I told Mrs. Henley. "Better than I dared hope. But I miss them, the people I thought they'd become with me in their lives." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Maybe that's not over yet. They're young. When they're older and understand more, they may find their way back." "Maybe," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. But I can't live my life waiting for maybe. That truth had finally settled in my bones. Emma and Jake might reconnect someday, or they might keep their distance. Either way, I couldn't spend my remaining years paralyzed by guilt for choices made in impossible circumstances. "Speaking of not waiting," Mrs. Henley said, pulling a cream-colored envelope from her purse, "I have something for you." Inside was an invitation to her niece's wedding with a handwritten note. "Please come." You're family now." I looked up to see Mrs. Henley trying not to smile. "Family?" I asked. "You saved my life when Tom had his heart attack. You've been there for every crisis and celebration since. That makes you family in my book." It was true. Somewhere along the way, without planning it, we'd become each other's chosen family. Later in my garden, the roses I'd transplanted from my old house bloomed brighter than ever, as if they too had thrived after leaving poisoned soil. I was deadheading a cluster of peace roses when my phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a Costa Rican area code. For a heartbeat, I considered ignoring it. That chapter of my life felt closed, but something made me answer. "Mrs. Morrison?" "This is Miguel Santos, a social worker with American Citizen Services in San Jose. Emma asked me to call you." My heart clenched. "Emma? Is she all right?" "She's wonderful. She's graduating next month, valedictorian of her class, and she's been accepted to Georgetown University on a full scholarship in international relations." I sank onto the garden bench, overcome by pride and a bittersweet ache. "She's moving back to the United States," he added. "Washington, D.C., just a few hours from you." "Did she say anything else?" I whispered. "Yes, ma'am. She said she understands now why you made the choices you made, and she hopes someday you'll meet the woman she's become." Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in years, they were tears of possibility. That evening, I called Sarah Peterson to thank her for everything she'd done. "I'm considering an article on elder fraud cases like yours," she said. "With your permission, of course." "What would I say?" I mused. "That the strongest thing a victim can do is refuse to stay a victim," Sarah replied. "That justice isn't just about punishment. It's about reclaiming your own life." After we hung up, I walked through my quiet home, turning on lamps against the dusk. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall was mine, chosen and placed by me alone. What once might have felt lonely now felt like freedom. I cooked a simple dinner, read a book purely because it interested me, and later caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was older, yes, but stronger. Neil and Avalon had tried to reduce me to nothing more than a bank account. They'd almost succeeded, but I was still here, battered but not broken, changed but not destroyed. That, I realized, was the best revenge of all. Tomorrow I would start planning a trip to Georgetown. Maybe Emma would want to see me, maybe not. Either way, I'd be ready to meet the remarkable young woman my granddaughter had become. I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, surrounded by the peaceful silence of a life that finally belonged entirely to me. For the first time in decades, I fell asleep smiling. Call to action for viewers. If you've listened this far, thank you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to rebuild from nothing? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And before you go, check out the 2 videos on screen now. They're channel favorites and full of twists you won't see coming.